Welcome back to This Week. I'm pleased to be joined by MMA Creative Vice President, Democratic Operative Mike Kopp, and her daily on 1510 WLAC syndicated talk show host, Steve Gill. Welcome, gentlemen. We saw this week Governor Haslam unveil his Jobs for Tennessee program, which emphasizing expanding existing businesses, much similar to what Governor Bredesen was doing the last year of his administration, but different from what Governor Bredesen did for most of his administration. This targets companies that are already here hoping to expand growth, create new jobs. Is this the way to go during this recession?
I think you've got to do it all, which is what they're doing, and I think it's really kind of fits what Bill Haslam was talking about as candidate Haslam rather than Governor Haslam. He was talking about doing more in the rural communities. You know, our suburban areas and our urban areas have high unemployment in the 8 to 10 range, some as low as 6, but in our rural communities we've got 18 to 20% unemployment. You've got to do something to kind of target better in those communities, and frankly, dragging new companies there isn't likely to happen. You've got to grow what's already there in some cases, and I think that's where this putting little groups out in the state, coordinating with other agencies. I think one of the exciting things about the program is the idea of doing better coordinating with the Commissioner of Agriculture, the Commissioner of Environment and Conservation, the Commissioner of ECD, to make sure that those folks are talking better with the local guys, and that's where you're going to help grow jobs.
Well, first of all, the concept of agencies working together was the Jobs Cabinet that Governor Bredesen did, and it was one of his first executive orders, and that worked very well during his administration. The problem in what I'm seeing here, and it's really not maybe a problem, it's just there's a missing piece here, and it's what kind of incentives are you going to put on the table for existing industries. It's not enough simply to go to an existing industry and say, we want you to grow here. You know, even in the world of existing industry, you're competing with other states, in some cases other countries, to keep that business here. You've got to have some kind of incentives. And the talk on the street is that they're looking at the incentives, but there still hadn't been any meat on the table. So I think what we heard this week was part of a jobs plan, but we still don't have the meat behind it.
Is part of the problem the money for incentives simply isn't here right now during this recession, and that we're trying to wait to get through that to try to build what's here?
Well, the way you look at incentives is it's not simply giving away cash. What you try to do is make sure that you've done your homework so that for every dollar that you give of a state investment, you're going to get so much in return to the tax base, whether it's creating a job that in turn creates sales tax and what have you. But again, we don't know if there's going to be any changes to the incentive program, so we really don't know how they're going to grow existing industries.
I think part of it is a little of showing the love. You've got companies here in Tennessee that have been paying taxes, that have been creating jobs for a long time. I think what the Haslam administration has found in their bottom-to-top review is that these companies are saying, man, nobody's talked to us in years. Nobody's asking us, what could you do to help? What regulations, what barriers, what taxes might be making it harder for them to compete? So I think some of it is show the love. But I think Mike's right that at the same time, most of the incentives when we're doing the big attraction to bring a company from Illinois or California is we'll build you some roads, we'll train some of your workforce. We can do some additional training for small businesses and help them grow. But you're not going to be building roads for a 5-person, 10-person company. So a lot of the incentives are when you've got a big area, like you're building in Clarksville or West Tennessee or down in Volkswagen, where you're helping build the infrastructure for that big plant to locate, which really doesn't apply as an incentive when you're dealing with small businesses.
And they have to be hoping, too, for windfalls, as it were, similar to what's happening at Nissan. Because of increased car sales, because of the tragedy in Japan, they're going to be adding 1,300 jobs by producing more vehicles there that they can't produce in Japan.
And the danger with just concentrating as they're hinting at with existing industries is what happens to that point if the industry goes away. What happens in we have a big white goods industry, we have Whirlpool and those kind of companies. What happens to if the market changes and all of a sudden they have to ship more jobs overseas? If you've invested primarily in those existing industries and you have not reached out and come up with creative incentives to bring new industry in or the new technologies, what are you going to be left with?
Well, there's no indication that they're abandoning the go out and try to make sure we're making the message that this is a great place to do business. Low taxes. They're actually dealing with some of the barriers for some companies by looking at some of the tax structure, making sure that our regulatory system is better and cleaner, and making sure that we're dealing with tort reform, among other issues, to make it a more competitive business environment. And trust me, they're going to Illinois, they're going to New York, they're going to California, and those are extraordinarily target-rich environments for Tennessee right now.
We talked with Senator Corker this week about the deficit reduction plan, the Republicans, the Democrats, and he says everything has to be on the table, including the defense budget. Do you agree? Do you think that will happen?
Well, I think that there's fat, there's waste, there's abuse, there's stuff we don't need and certainly that we can't afford in every avenue of government. I think the problem with President Obama's plan is he's talking about using a scalpel instead of a machete. We're $14 trillion in debt. He's adding $1.5 trillion a year. You're not going to be able to trim your way out of it. We've got to deal seriously with this, and his plan doesn't do it.
Well, and one of the issues that both sides have got to deal with is you've got to drill down on these tax breaks for the extremely wealthy. You can't leave those on the table. You've got to address those. I mean, one of the reasons why we're so many billions of dollars in debt is because you have a percent of this country that's not paying their taxes. And that's just not fair to the people that are out there struggling from day to day.
Right. You've got half of the country not paying any federal income taxes, Mike. Half the country pays zero federal income taxes, and they're going after the top 1% that pays about 40%. You could tax 100% of what the wealthiest earn in this country, and it wouldn't make a dent in the deficit. You've got to cut spending, and the Democrats don't want to cut it down.
This is going to be a big bone of contention, though, because the president has said he will not renew these tax cuts again,
right.
And the Republicans are saying they need to continue in order to create jobs.
Well, he supported them just a few months ago, and now he's pretending that somehow the recession means that we don't have to keep those tax cuts in place. I'd like him to explain that to the 411,000 people this week who filed new unemployment claims, that somehow the recession's over and the good times are here.
And I think, again, I agree with Steve. I think you've got to take the people that aren't paying taxes, and you've got to address that as well. But you can't simply take the extreme wealthy and sit them over here and say, we're going to continue to give you this privilege in this economy, in this recession, where you don't have to pay any taxes.
What's the privilege when they're paying 30, 40, and 45%? How are you saying they're not paying taxes?
Well, you got all these tax breaks for them. I mean, you do have a different rate.
But the tax break is, instead of paying 35%, you pay 30%. That's not a tax break to let you keep 70% of what you've earned instead of only 50% of what you've earned.
And you also have these major companies, particularly in the oil industry, that make billions of dollars in revenue that again have all these tax loopholes. You've got to put all those tax loopholes on the table, all of them.
Spending is the key. Senator Corker wants to implement the Cap Act, effectively boiling it down. You can't spend if you don't have the money to buy something. So there would be no more debt that way. But this has a long way to go, too, before it can become law and effectively reduce the spending that's already out there.
My question, with due respect to Senator Corker, is kind of like, where's the beef? Where's the teeth? What's going to make it happen? In Tennessee, we've got the Copeland cap that's supposedly going to control spending to keep it in line with how much tax revenues are going up. And while we have to balance our budget in Tennessee, they keep raising the Copeland cap all the time. What's going to be the teeth in Washington after you set this cap to make sure they live within it?
I completely agree with Steve. But this concept is not new. Jim Cooper's been talking about pay-as-you-go for a long, long time. It's never got any traction.
Talked a little bit about a minute ago, the debt ceiling is the key to all of this. Does the debt ceiling have to be raised? The president says there's no question it does. Republicans do not want to raise the debt ceiling.
Well, President Obama voted against raising the debt ceiling when George Bush was asking the same thing, as did Harry Reid, as did most of the Democratic Party leadership. Now the shoe's on the other foot. They're saying we desperately have to do this. They find a way to get it done, but I think they're going to have to trade some cuts for it.
The bottom line is you have to raise it. If you don't, we go into default, and that creates such an issue with long-term credit ratings, where our country is we're in an even worse situation financially.
Can anything be resolved 15 seconds until this issue is resolved?
It's got to be resolved first.
You got to deal with that first, but you got to get some cuts to show that you're serious about that.
Steve Gill, Mike Kopp, appreciate your time and your insight. Stay with us. This week continues in a moment.